You're not going to be satisfied until you're in a winning position, though, are you?
I believe if you are doing something like competing, like motor racing, you either do well or forget it.
In 2006, a poll was taken in Japan to find out who the nation's populace considered the 100 greatest historical figures. Among the list containing 59 of Japan's most influential individuals were 41 from other countries across the globe. Gandhi, the Wright brothers, Florence Nightingale, Beethoven, Einstein, Leonardo da Vinci, Marie Curie, and at 22, Ayrton Senna of Brazil. This is the life and legacy of Ayrton Senna. Ayrton Senna was born March 21, 1960 in Santana, a suburb of Sao Paulo, Brazil. He was the second of 3 children growing up in a wealthy family. Ayrton was passionate about auto racing, and his parents cared deeply about fostering their children's passions. Part of Ayrton's love of racing came from the Senna family's diehard love of Formula One. Their favorite driver, the incredible Jim Clark. At the start of the 1968 season, Clark had won the Formula One Drivers' Championship 2 times and amassed a jaw-dropping 33 pole positions with 25 race wins within an impressively low 72 starts. On April 7, 1968, Jim passed away when his car left the track, striking a tree during a Formula 2 racing event. He was just 32 years old. Ayrton was 8 at the time and was already driving around the family farm, in town, and had competed in non-official kart races. Speaking of his first race, I was about 8 years old, and the majority of the people there were 15, 18, 20, and the way to decide the grid position was by drawing, so they put papers with numbers inside a helmet, and I was the youngest. I drew first, and I pulled number 1, so I was on pole position for my first event. I was small, light, so my go-kart was the fastest one with the weight advantage I had. I stayed in the front for many laps because people just could not overtake me. They were quicker than me in the corners, but on the straight, I was going away from them. I was third with 3 laps to go, and the guy behind me who was always trying to overtake me touched me, and I went off. So I didn't finish the race, but it was really good fun. By the time he was of age to compete, Senna was dominating the local circuit, winning the Sao Paulo Junior Kart Championship 1 year after he officially started competing. Up until he turned 21, Senna remained active in the kart racing scene, winning multiple regional championships while contesting for the World Championship, netting second place finishes in 78, 79, and 1980. This would be the only racing series he would enter without taking home a first place finish. This is also the period of his competitive life that he would look back on with the fondest memories, as he continued to promote kart racing to the next generation throughout his life. In the years that followed, Senna rose through the professional circuit, winning again and again and again, until finally joining a Formula One team in 1984 by signing with Toleman. His rookie season is notable for a few reasons. At the 4th race in San Marino, Senna would fail to qualify for the first and only time in his career. It wasn't due to Senna, but rather a dispute between his team Toleman and tire provider Pirelli that kept the car off the track on the first day of qualifying. An engine failure on day 2 kept him from posting a time, keeping him out of the race that weekend. The biggest accolade of 1984 would come just 1 month later at Monaco. Toleman was by no means considered a contender for even a podium finish. Their cars were light years behind the competition in handling, acceleration, and speed, so if a Toleman driver wanted to finish with a high ranking, it had to be via skill alone. And one opportunity that was key for such an occasion was a rainy day on a technical track such as Monaco. Of the entire 84 season, Toleman drivers would rarely place within the top 10, and only once did Senna place within the top 5 when posting a qualifying time. Monaco was no different, with Senna starting in the 13th position and his teammate in position 18. Over the course of 30 laps consisting of poor visibility and heavy rain, Senna passed 11 of the 12 drivers who started ahead of him, leaving only Alain Prost, who he had been closing the gap on by 3 seconds with every lap. On the 32nd lap, he took the lead, crossing the finish line as the red flag came out, closing a 7-second time gap in the process. Senna felt he had won, but by F1 rules, the final lap that counts is the one prior to the red flag. This still gave him the fastest lap, but as he had passed Prost on the final lap, he would only receive second place. In '84, 35 drivers would compete, with 11 claiming a second place finish. Only 5 drivers would net a first place finish, 4 of which had been or would become champions. Most people, including Senna, felt he had won the race, and questionable intentions were the reason it was stopped, snatching certain victory away after it had been seized. The commotion centered around Jackie Ickx, who had been appointed as special race director for the event. He had stopped the race without consulting the race stewards, leading to his suspension from accepting such duties in the future. Over the remainder of the season, Senna would achieve podium status 2 more times, finishing out at 9th overall. Niki Lauda would win his 3rd and final championship, with a half-point advantage over his teammate Alain Prost. Following the end of the '84 season, Senna signed on with Lotus, who had been pursuing him, feeling he had a natural talent similar to the legendary Jim Clark. Moving from Toleman to Lotus not only supplied Senna with a car worthy of a contender, but a substantial increase in salary from $50,000 to over $1 million. His first year on the team would net 6 podiums and 2 first-place finishes, both of which were in the rain. His win in the Portuguese Grand Prix would be a sign of things to come. It was his first time qualifying for an F1 pole position, and the victory was by an incredible 1 minute, 2 seconds over second place, and 1 lap or more for all remaining drivers. The '85 season would see Senna take pole on 7 of the 16 races, while being forced to retire or finish with a disadvantage due to mechanical issues in around half of the season's races. Even with these problems, the consistency when the car was functional netted a 4th place finish for the season, with the incredible Alain Prost taking home his first world championship. The '86 season saw Lotus upgrade the car from the 97T to the 98T, an upgrade that gave greater reliability and more power at the cost of higher fuel consumption, all in an era where Formula 1 was regulating fuel capacity. The increased power netted Senna pole position in 8 of the 16 starts, though the fuel regulation kept him from truly being competitive. In addition, though the team felt the 98T to be more reliable than the 97T from the prior season, mechanical issues remained. Issues that were the cause of every race Senna wouldn't complete, while fuel exhaustion resulted in loss of position on the final lap on numerous occasions. Like '85, '86 saw Alain Prost win the championship with Senna taking 4th for a second time. For Senna, one thing was clear. The Honda engines in Williams cars were faster and more fuel efficient, allowing them to run harder for longer periods of time than his Renault. Senna looked to Honda and directly negotiated with them to secure their engines for Lotus. It seemed like an unlikely partnership, being Honda was already the supplier for Williams, but Senna had an inside track. Honda was unhappy with Williams' refusal to have a Japanese driver on their team, and felt the work ethic of that team didn't reflect their own standard. Senna didn't see this as an issue and proposed the inclusion of Honda's test driver as part of the deal. Satoru Nakajima would join Lotus for the '87 season as the first full-time Japanese driver in the sport's history, and would go on to become the first Japanese driver to score points in Formula 1, a turn of events that directly impacted the popularity of Formula 1 in Japan. The only downfall of the arrangement was Honda's contract with Williams. It gave them exclusive access to the motor they chose to compete with, meaning Lotus would be stuck with the prior year's model. '86 was also significant because of the passing of Senna's friend and teammate from the prior season, Elio De Angelis. Elio, who was one of the most popular drivers in the sport, had changed teams to Motor Racing Developments in '86 to take over a team as the #1 driver. While out testing the BT55 between races, the rear wing detached, causing the car to flip end over end until coming to a rest upside down. The car caught fire, leaving Elio with mild burns on his back, along with a broken collarbone from the crash itself. By all accounts, the fire should have been put out, The car returned right side up, with Elio returning home with only minor injuries. The track was underprepared for such an incident, and Elio remained stuck in an overturned, burning wreck for 30 minutes. By the time a helicopter arrived and he was removed, Elio had gone into cardiac arrest, passing away the following day due to complications connected with smoke inhalation and oxygen deprivation. The resulting tragedy would impact Senna for the remainder of his life, while also ushering in new safety regulations to keep something like this from ever happening again. With the 87 season on the horizon, a Japanese driver having a full-time position on the team, and Honda engines finally in a position to win the Constructors' Cup, the popularity of the sport saw a huge jump in Japan. For the first time ever, every race of the season would be broadcast on national TV. Most important, though, was Formula One's return to Japan with a race at Suzuka for the first time since 1977. For Senna, the season itself was rather disappointing, as it quickly became apparent that the Honda engines Lotus ran were miles behind the updated versions used by Williams. Senna would eventually finish the season in third place, taking only one pole and 2 race wins over the course of 16 starts, the most notable being his win in Monaco, which would be his first of a record-setting 6 wins on that track. Nelson Piquet won the championship, but would not be staying with Williams to defend his title. Arrangements had long been set in place that would see major movements among the drivers the following season. Senna was leaving Lotus for McLaren, while Piquet would be taking over Senna's position at Lotus. These moves were due in large part to negotiations Senna had with McLaren and Honda. Over the course of the 87 season, Honda and Senna had become very close on and off track. Besides, Honda had still not forgotten that Williams had declined the inclusion of a Japanese driver on their team. So when Senna suggested they pull their contract and move with him to McLaren, Honda went all in. Piquet would leave Williams as they couldn't compete without Honda and joined Lotus, who happened to have 1 year left with Satoru Nakajima and of course Honda as an engine supplier. One thing that sets Formula One apart from most other motorsports is every driver has a teammate. This, in fact, becomes the driver's main rival, as it's the only other person on the track who has access to the same car and engine. A driver might be able to justly blame a poor showing on an inferior machine when compared to the competition, but on a team, the best rises to the top. Any driver who hopes to find success in the sport needs to be the better driver on the team they join if they ever hope to advance. Senna had done this twice, coming into a team as the number 2 and quickly showing himself to be the superior driver. Joining McLaren was a massive step forward, and some feared it would be the beginning of the end for Senna's career. His new teammate, 2-time champion Alain Prost, who was the odds-on favorite to win the championship that year, with most considering his top contender, defending champion Nelson Piquet. 88 would be one of the greatest seasons in motorsporting history. Senna and Prost would win all but one race. Senna would take home a record-setting 8 victories and 13 pole positions over 16 races. Prost was just as brilliant, scoring 7 podiums and 7 second-place finishes, with 2 retirements due to mechanical problems. Ultimately, Prost scored more points, but in 88, only the 11 best results for each driver were considered out of 16 races, putting Senna just enough points ahead of Prost to take home his first championship. The championship was clenched in Japan with his first place finish at Suzuka. At 28 years old, he had become world champion and national hero of not only Brazil, but of Japan. 88 was a brilliant year, and one of the most legendary performances for Senna was a race he didn't even complete. For the entirety of Senna's Formula One career, only 2 drivers won at Monaco, Senna and Prost. This would be one of the few times both Senna and Prost would compete at Monaco using the same car. When it came to qualifying, Senna took pole with an astounding 1.5 second gap over Prost. Then came the race. The performance was brilliant, and with only a handful of laps to go, Senna had lapped most other drivers and had put almost a minute between his car and second place Prost. With the race clearly in hand, the team radioed Senna telling him to slow down, to which he complied. 1 lap later, Prost had pulled back 6 seconds. Stories are conflicting, but an apparent back and forth between Senna, who only wanted to put forth his best effort, and a team who only wanted their cars pushed to their max when required, caused enough distraction that Senna lost control in the final laps, crashing out of a race he should have won. Monaco was considered one of the most demanding tracks of that era, and for Senna, it was the track he most excelled on. '88 would be the last time he raced at Monaco and didn't win. It was a clear showcase as to a difference in philosophy. Senna raced to win every time, no matter the cost. Prost, on the other hand, raced to win championships, chasing points at the expense of individual race wins, a race strategy designed to mitigate the risk while capturing the required points needed to obtain a Constructors' Championship, hence his nickname, the Professor. With year-to-year rule changes concerning F1 cars, '88 to '89 was one of the biggest to hit the sport. A number of new engine regulations were put in place, ending the era of turbocharged performance. Senna and Prost entered the season on good terms, but by the start of Monaco, neither driver was speaking to each other over a falling out they had on the racetrack. About halfway through the season, Prost announced he was being mistreated by McLaren and would be leaving the team at the season's end to join Ferrari. By the time the championship entered Suzuka in Japan, Prost led Senna by 16 points. Senna had been the better driver in '89, netting 6 wins to Prost 4, but mechanical issues kept him from finishing 4 races, putting him in a must-win situation. For Senna, Japan was once again center stage in deciding who would become champion. If he could win in Japan and the upcoming Australia, he would clinch the championship regardless of where Prost came in, due to only the best 11 finishes being considered. Senna took pole with Prost in the number 2 position. Senna's car was set up the corner, while Prost set his up for top speed in a straight line, allowing him to jump ahead to the lead right from the start. By lap 46, Senna had closed the gap.
Go wide, not leave an opportunity and a door open through which Senna would be like a flash. Now, there are very few cars left on the circuit. There's 14 running now out of the 26 who started. And if Prost comes up to any of them, this is the opportunity that Senna's looking for, and he's going through. Ouch! Oh my goodness, this is fantastic. They meet. This is what we were fearing might happen during the race. And that means to say that Prost has won the World Championship. Alain Prost, World Champion of 1989.
Incredibly, Senna would do what seemed impossible. Rejoining the race after the wreck, he completed the lap without a front wing, requiring him to pit. As he exited the pit in second place, only 6 laps remained. Within 2 laps, Senna overtook the lead car and by lap 53 crossed the finish line in first place. It was an incredible victory and ensured the championship would be decided on the final race of the season. At least, that's how it appeared. However, Formula 1 is a tricky political sport, and Senna was disqualified for using the exit ramp to re-enter the race, which bypassed the chicane for safety reasons. However, according to the rules, the car must be turned around and pushed into oncoming traffic, then set to resume so that no part of the raceway is not covered. This decision caused massive uproar with the drivers who understood the implications of forcing a car to be pushed back to a starting position around a tight turn and against oncoming traffic. Even after appeals, the decision was upheld, while Senna received a $100,000 fine and 6-month ban from the sport. Soon after the incident, the rule was changed to make what Senna did legal. However, the damage had been done and would follow Ayrton into the coming season. With a fine and ban in place, Senna was convinced FISA President Jean-Marie Balest was doing everything he could to remove Senna as competition. Balest and Prost were both French after all, and it was clear they had some sort of friendship beyond the track. Senna spoke out about the matter, and in retaliation, Balest released a statement. The World Council will not give a super license to Ayrton Senna in 1990 until he makes a public statement taking back the statements which are both false and detrimental to the FISA. Senna refused, and with just weeks to go, it looked likely that he would sit out the season. Balest made one thing clear: he could care less if Senna competed or about the Brazilian fans. Senna, realizing the implications of the situation, left the final decision of how to proceed in the hands of McLaren, who tried to make any concessions necessary to put Ayrton back on the track. The situation remained so contentious that even after things appeared to be resolved, Senna's license was not reinstated until the day before the season's first race. The season was another success for Senna, who netted 9 pole positions and 6 wins over 16 races. Tensions even subsided between he and Prost as the season came to a close. The competition for the Drivers' Champion remained extremely close as it had the prior 2 seasons coming into Suzuka. This time, however, Prost was in an identical must-win situation. It required he win the final 3 races of the season if he hoped to secure the championship. Coming into the Spanish Grand Prix, tragedy struck when Martin Donnelly suffered a near-fatal accident while practicing prior to Sunday's race. I went to the place where he was lying on the track. When I saw the immediate consequences of the accident, it was very difficult to cope and maintain my mental balance. I thought about not running anymore in qualifying.
Considering the accident, and as it happened to him, can happen to any of us. There are some things that you can calculate, but there are things which are unexpected. And those unexpected things are the most dangerous ones, like it happened to him today. I hope we don't see those things in the future.
Senna had become well known among his fellow drivers as a supporter of higher safety standards and someone who loved his fellow man. After things settled down, Senna had a conversation with Professor Sid Watkins, who had been on site and contributed to saving Donnelly's life. The topic was regarding what exactly he should do should a similar situation once again arise. The professor told me Ayrton took an extraordinarily keen interest in my welfare, and in all the procedures the medics went through. A lot of others did too, of course, but Ayrton was in constant touch with the professor. I was touched when I found out about it all later. Ayrton was quite a guy like that. Though the accident caused Ayrton to reflect on his life and career, he was committed to being a race car driver, and with that, he headed out and set a new qualifying time, which resulted in his 50th pole position. A blown radiator kept Senna from finishing that race, while Prost picked up the win, moving the showdown once again to Suzuka. In '89, Senna had taken pole at Suzuka, but was placed on the non-preferred side of the track, eliminating any advantage his position had given him. Prior to the race at Suzuka, this issue had been discussed, and the drivers were told the pole position would be moved to the grip side of the track rather than its current location. Senna took pole, and before the race, pole position was moved back to the dirt side, ensuring Senna couldn't enter the first turn while maintaining the first position. In motor racing, there's a term called closing the door. In essence, a driver takes a defensive position, putting their car between a closing gap and their opponent. Their opponent has 2 options. 1, they can slow down and concede position. 2, they can collide with the driver who is closing the door, putting both lives in danger. At Suzuka that year, the driver in second position had a clear line to close the door on the first turn, leaving a clear dilemma to the driver starting in pole position.
But Alain Prost, starting from second on the grid on the left-hand side, is actually going to have a start advantage at a circuit where passing is virtually impossible, except at the notorious chicane where Alain Prost and Ayrton Senna, both in McLarens last year, collided, and we all know what happened subsequently. Ayrton Senna went on to win the race only to be disqualified. On the left is Ayrton Senna, on the right is Alain Prost, behind Senna is Mansell, behind Prost is Berger, the grid is clear, the lights go! And Senna sprints away, but Alain Prost takes the lead. It's happened. Alain Prost has taken the advantage. Senna is trying to go through on the inside, and it's happened immediately. This is amazing. Senna goes off at the first corner, but what has happened to Prost? He has gone off too. Well, that is amazing, but I fear absolutely predictable.
Mere seconds in, and the championship had been decided in the most controversial way possible. It was a sad championship, but that was the result of the 1989 championship. Remember, I won that race and it was taken away. I was so frustrated that I promised myself that I would go for it in the first corner, regardless of the consequences. I would go for it. I didn't care if we crashed. He took a chance, he turned, and we crashed. But what happened was a result of 1989. It was a build-up. It was unavoidable. 1990 also brings us to the Senna-Sega connection. In '89, Sega released an arcade follow-up to their popular Monaco GP series. The game was incredibly popular, leading to a greatly enhanced Mega Drive port.
It's the Super Monaco Grand Prix from Sega. 16 circuits to conquer, 16 Formula 1 cars to master. Trouble? Then switch transmissions or call the Sega hotline. The Super Monaco Grand Prix is racing now on Sega Mega Drive. Serious fun. From Sega.
The port expanded on the arcade's one track by offering a championship mode which included 16 tracks and fictional representations of all teams and drivers. The top driver in the game, G. Sira, who was in fact Ayrton Senna. With the next season on the horizon, changes to the scoring system were implemented for the first time since 1981. A first place finish would now be worth 10 points rather than 9, and for the first time ever, every race would count towards the championship total. Even before the first contest, one thing was clear: the Honda-backed Mclaren was no longer the top car on the track. That title once again belonged to Williams, who after separating from Honda and struggling for a few seasons, had finally partnered with an engine provider worthy of a championship team, Renault. Senna would win his first race, as both Williams drivers experienced mechanical issues. The second race of the season was in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and Senna had yet to claim victory in his hometown. He took pole and a commanding lead during the early race. By lap 60, his transmission was failing to the point that only 6th gear remained. Even with a 40-second time gap, it seemed impossible he could maintain the lead. With 11 laps remaining and no lower gears to assist with tight corners and steep climbs, the track presented major issues for a car stuck in high gear. With 4 laps left to go, the gap between Senna and second place had dropped to 5 seconds, and then it started to rain. 3 laps later, he would win for his first time in Brazil, losing only 2.5 seconds over the closing laps. The odds were stacked against him, and what was accomplished seemed impossible, but Senna had won what would be remembered as one of the finest victories in motorsports history. He would go on to claim victory at San Marino and Monaco, making it 4 wins in a row. By mid-season, it was clear that Williams was working out the kinks of their new car, and when reliable, it was superior to anything else on the track. The car was assisted by electronic aids, which included anti-lock brakes, active suspension, and traction control, ushering in what would become a short-lived and controversial era. By the time Formula 1 returned to Japan, Nigel Mansell was within striking distance of the championship, and like prior years, Suzuka was a must-win race. 10 laps in, Mansell lost control of his car, cementing a second-place finish for the world title. Senna would lead the race until the final lap, where he slowed down, allowing his teammate and close friend the race victory while he claimed his 3rd championship. Throughout the season, Alain Prost experienced terrible mechanical luck, leading him to abandon 33% of all races. It would be the first and last time since his rookie year that he didn't claim a victory throughout the season. Prost very publicly placed blame on Ferrari, who in turn fired him before season's end. Alain had felt frustrated by his lost season and declared he would not be returning to compete in '92. Senna had achieved a status of idolization across the world only seen by the likes of Michael Jackson. Back in Brazil, he was considered a national hero, while in Japan, the people considered him a living legend, often declaring him a modern samurai. Beyond sharing a love of Senna, the people of Brazil shared a love for Sega, which was by far the most popular game maker in the country. With Sega already releasing a game unofficially including Senna, one man in Brazil felt it was time to make it official. When Sega launched the Genesis in North America, Sega hired Michael Katz to build the infrastructure necessary to market and distribute their systems and games. Katz's primary strategy was to place resources into establishing and supporting new games backed by celebrity endorsement and licensed properties. The system launched and quickly became a massive success due to Katz's marketing and development strategy. It was the exact stepping stone Sega needed to take hold of the 16-bit era in North America. Meanwhile, in Brazil, Sega had entered a licensing agreement with TecToy, allowing them to not only distribute the system, but manufacture and develop exclusive games and ports. Part of the strategy TecToy used in pursuit of success was to emulate what worked in America, as they felt the North American market more closely mirrored Brazil's. Our direct contact with Sega of Japan gave us access to a lot of information, and sometimes we had information on future developments that not everyone at Sega of America was up to date with. The Brazilian market is far more related to the US market than to Japan though, so the help from Sega of America was very much appreciated. In fact, Sega liked the idea so much that they decided to make it a sequel to the last game in their popular Super Monaco series. Programming would be handled in Japan by the same team behind the original Super Monaco and Super Hang-On, ensuring that the game released would be a top-tier racing experience. The unique thing about this game was Senna's direct involvement. Whereas all other sports-related endorsees only helped to promote the game their image was attached to, Senna felt a deep conviction that a game released with his name attached should be as accurate as possible to the sport it was trying to emulate. To ensure this, he joined the development team as project supervisor while bringing his cousin Fabio Machado on as project manager. Development started during the 91 season and continued on through 1992. Senna implemented a number of changes from the prior version to bring the game in line with the actual experience of racing on the track.
Foi um projeto grande em cima do Super Monaco GP2 e para nós foi muito legal porque a gente teve bastante contato com o Ayrton, que se mostrou um profissional espetacular. Ele realmente entrou no detalhe do jogo. Por exemplo, no Super Monaco GP, acho que no Mega Drive, quando o carro passava em cima da zebra, o software descontava uns pontinhos e deteriorava um pouco a máquina. E o Ayrton falou, isso não está correto, porque nós usamos a zebra para apoio. Se você passar em cima demais, aí sim. Né? Então ele só concordou a hora que os japoneses conseguiram acertar de tal forma de que uma certa passada em cima da zebra não fazia nada e um exagero de passada, por exemplo. Então ele entrou no nível do detalhe do jogo. E aí foi um dos primeiros jogos de voz sintetizada no 16 bits. E os japoneses queriam que ele falasse uma frase para cada circuito, né? Porque o Super Monaco GP eram os circuitos e tinha Barcelona. E Barcelona entrava no circuito da Fórmula 1 pela primeira vez. E ele falou, como é que eu vou gravar para vocês uma frase em um circuito que eu não conheço? Né? Aí o falou, não, uma frase, né? Não, vocês estão me pedindo de fazer uma coisa que eu não posso fazer. Mas eu prometo de que no dia da corrida, no próprio domingo à noite, depois de terminar a corrida, que vai ter os treinos e a corrida, eu gravo a frase. Aí muda todo o schedule de desenvolvimento, você pode mandar 5.000 japoneses lá mudando o schedule para esperar o dia do GP para dar tempo e tal. E, você imagina, depois de uma prova de Fórmula 1, cansaço que deve ser e tudo, nível de profissionalismo assim, foi lá, gravou, mandou a fita, não me lembro.
Ayrton Senna's Super Monaco GP2 would receive critical acclaim and see localization in no less than 9 regions. Sega fans in America might have been unfamiliar with Senna, the driver, but by the time the game hit shelves, he would become a household name, even if people didn't realize exactly who he was. While everyone expected Senna to repeat in 92, it was mostly disappointing. He finished in 4th, just 3 points behind Michael Schumacher, who was competing in his first full season, and 6 points behind Riccardo Patrese. Nigel Mansell absolutely ran away with the championship, netting 108 points over 9 wins, 3 second-place finishes, and 4 retirements. The issue for Senna was reliability. He was forced to retire from exactly half of all the season's races, mostly due to mechanical problems. The Williams car Mansell drove was unstoppable, as Nigel netted 14 poles to Senna's 1. This would be Honda's final year supplying engines to Formula 1 teams. Company chair Soichiro Honda had made the decision near the end of the prior season, shortly before passing away. Senna realized that even if Mclaren could get their machine in order, succeeding without Honda in 93 would be nearly impossible. He advised his friend and teammate Gerard Berger that it was time to move on. Berger would move to Ferrari, where Senna hoped to one day join him, but for 93, he intended to join Williams. While Williams' superiority caused 92 to be rather lackluster, Senna did win a few epic races, including Monaco, by a scarce quarter of a second time gap. There was also an incident that showed just how much Senna cared about his fellow man. At Spa, Eric Comas wrecked his car directly in front of Senna during a practice run. Senna quickly stopped, jumped out of his car, and ran across the track, hoping to assist Comas if needed. He would be the only one to do so, as cars continued to bypass the wreck. Remembering what Professor Sid Watkins had instructed him to do in such an event, he immediately went to work trying to ensure Comas would survive. Then, of course, subsequently, he arrived once or twice at an accident before anyone else did. It happened with Eric Comas in Spa, By the time I got there, Senna was kneeling down holding his neck in the correct way, I might add. As I took over, Ayrton said, "I made sure his breathing was alright, and I've asked the marshals to keep the helmet so you can examine it for damage. He was a great student. I found that anything I ever said to him was filed away in his mind forever. Never forgot a thing." If there was one person who could shake up Formula 1, Alain Prost was it. At the end of the '92 season, Williams announced Prost would be coming out of retirement to join their team. Part of his contract stipulated that Senna couldn't join Prost, ending his negotiation with Williams. It wasn't just Senna though. Nigel Mansell felt betrayed by Williams' signing of Prost and left Formula 1 for IndyCar, where he went on to claim the championship in '93. Senna signed with Mclaren on a race-by-race contract which paid $1 million per event. Having lost Honda, Mclaren contracted with Ford as their engine supplier. It was a similar situation to Lotus and Honda, in that Benetton was Ford's team, thus having the preferred contract. Ford also provided engines to Lotus, Minardi, and Mclaren in '93, but Benetton made sure only vastly outdated models were made available for most of the year. Coming into the season, a new and unexpected sponsor emerged in Sega. They took a massive marketing step by sponsoring both a Formula 1 team with Williams and a race by securing the naming and brand rights to the Sega Asian Grand Prix. Sega had put their money behind Williams Renault, whose cars would prominently feature Sega and Sonic branding. Not only was their team considered to have the fastest car, they had also signed three-time champion Alain Prost to a 3-year contract, so the championship looked to be in the bag. Formula 1 had exploded in popularity within Japan, mostly thanks to Senna and Honda. So, for the first time ever, the race organizers looked to add a second race in Japan to occur within the same season. The venue was announced as the brand new Autopolis, with the race to be held on April 11th as the third event that season. However, as the event neared, the track's owner faced legal and financial problems, causing Formula 1 to pull out and look for an emergency replacement venue. Donington Park threw its hat in the ring, and though it seemed an unlikely choice, they somehow secured the rights. This would be Formula 1's return to the European Grand Prix after an 8-year absence, and the only time the race would ever be held at Donington Park. Sega had been right to back Williams, as their car was a Superman among mere mortals. By a sizable margin, the team would claim every pole position that season except one, which went to Senna. Even driving for a team that had at best the third fastest car on the circuit, Ayrton continued to impress. Second during the first race, another victory in Brazil, and Donington was next, with the race now dubbed the Sega European Grand Prix. Periodic wet weather plagued the race weekend. The first qualifying session was held in the rain, with Senna turning in the fastest time. The second session gave drivers a reprieve from the weather with dry roads, allowing each driver to display the genuine speed, capabilities, and flaws of each car around the track. Prost took pole position, with his teammate taking second. Michael Schumacher in third, and Senna fourth on the grid after finishing 1.7 seconds behind the superior Williams car. The race was held on Easter Sunday, and rain was falling as the drivers took position. Some of the better cars had launch control, but Senna's McLaren did not. His start was poor as he fell back to 5th place. Over the course of the remaining lap, he would go from 5th to 1st in what's now considered Formula 1's greatest lap.
Grand Prix. Prost gets away well, so does Hill, so does Schumacher, and Wendlinger is coming up well. Senna is crowded out and is down to 5th position, and Wendlinger is up into 3rd place ahead of Schumacher. Brilliant start by the Austrian driver in the black Sauber. Prost leads, Hill 2nd, Wendlinger is 3rd, and Ayrton Senna is up to 4th position ahead of Schumacher and challenging Wendlinger as they go round the right-hander into the old hairpin. Senna is up to 3rd.
And after being crowded at the start, a quite brilliant couple of corners by Ayrton Senna. Tremendous stuff. He muscled his way back into contention at Redgate. He's going inside Damon Hill. And Senna into 2nd place already. And he's giving it absolutely everything in the wet part of the race.
So 2 retirements already, Michael Andretti and Carl Wendlinger, and Senna goes through into the lead. He's passed Alain Prost, so the McLaren leads, Prost 2nd, Hill is 3rd, a tremendous gap between the 3rd and 4th cars.
Not only would Senna go on to win the race by a staggering 1 minute and 23 seconds, he demolished the competition. Damon Hill, who finished 2nd after Senna, was the only driver to complete the race in the same lap. Sega's first and only sponsored race, along with their now iconic Sonic Formula 1 trophy, was won by the man many consider to be the greatest of all time in what would become one of his greatest wins. The season was decided in Portugal with 2 races left to go. Prost was world champion once again. He promptly announced after the race that this season would be his last. Senna would be taking over his seat at Williams in '94. Ayrton would win the final 2 races in '93, bringing his total to 5 wins and 2 second-place finishes. An incredible feat for a driver stuck in an inferior car with an inferior motor. In third was future champion Damon Hill. In fourth, future 7-time champion Michael Schumacher. '93 also brought closure to the feud between Prost and Senna. By season's end, their relationship had changed to one of friendship and respect. Senna's desire to join Williams wasn't merely to get behind the wheel of the most sophisticated car on the track, it was also rooted in a decade-long discussion and friendship with team principal Frank Williams. Frank had opened the door for Senna, giving him his first test drive in Formula 1. The two had remained friends, often discussing working together, but things hadn't entirely lined up. '94 was the right time for a plan that had been long in consideration. Many fans felt Senna would have no trouble winning every race should no mechanical problems result in a race retirement. Odds makers were certain he would win no less than 10 of the 16 races along with the championship that year. Even with Senna joining the team, Williams had a major issue on their hands. The Williams car had been designed with electronic assistance in mind, including active suspension and traction control. Formula 1 saw these systems, along with the cost associated with their development, to be a major problem for the sport's future and teams of smaller financial means. This was confirmed by the results in '92 and '93, so in '94 these aids were banned. Without them, the Williams car was abysmal on the track. The team tried to make adjustments on the fly to a car not designed to operate without these systems on board, but it was made clear that this would take considerable time. The '94 car was not a good car at all at the start of the year. It was very difficult to drive. We developed the aerodynamics using active suspension, and we developed them to work in a very small window. To be honest, we made a bloody awful cock-up. The rear end grip problem was purely a setup problem. We were learning things about springs and dampeners all over again after concentrating on active suspension for 2 years, whereas most people had been away for just 1. We also had a rather silly aerodynamic problem. Basically, the front wing was too low, but that was raised for Imola, by which time we were looking in pretty good shape. On the first day of qualifying, Senna would set a time giving him his 65th pole position. To give perspective to how great Senna was at qualifying over his F1 career, he ranks first when only considering drivers who have started 100 races or more. When no limit is placed on the number of starts, Senna ranks 4th behind Ascari, Clark, and Fangio. No one else even comes close. By the 3rd race of the '94 season, things hadn't gone well for Senna. He had not finished the 2 prior races, even though he appeared to be in top form, claiming pole in both events. Michael Schumacher was leading the Drivers' Championship standing, with Senna's teammate Damon Hill in 2nd. His good friends Rubens Barrichello and Gerard Berger held 3rd and 4th respectively. Senna himself had yet to score a single point, making it the slowest start to his career. At the beginning of the afternoon qualifying session, Barrichello hit a curb, causing his car to go airborne. A marshal was quickly on site and turned the wrecked car over, further endangering his life. It wasn't the right move to perform, but thankfully, Barrichello had no injuries that could be made worse by the marshal's action. Sid Watkins was there soon after, ensuring Barrichello would live to race another day. By the time the helicopter took off to take Rubens to the hospital, we were all fairly confident that he was going to be alright. Spirits were high, congratulations to the medical team were welcomed, the system had worked, and the result was joyful. Coming into the final day of qualifying, rookie Ronald Ratzenberger had yet to post a time that would qualify for a grid position. Only 25 of the 28 entries would receive a spot on the grid. Friday's time put Ratzenberger on the cusp in 26th place. Midway through his final qualifying session, things went terribly wrong. Ratzenberger would be the first driver to lose his life at a Grand Prix event since Riccardo Paletti in 1982, and the first driver to pass due to an accident involving a Formula 1 car since Elio De Angelis in '86. For the first time in Senna's career, he decided he would not be participating in the second round of qualifying as he and the other drivers tried to cope with the aftermath of 2 terrible accidents leading up to race day.
Ratzenberger, qualifying for only his second Grand Prix, hit the wall at 300 kilometers per hour. There was little anyone could do. The 31-year-old was crushed, the side of his car torn off. It was the first death at an official Grand Prix for 12 years. Paramedics tried to revive him at the track with heart massage. He was flown to hospital but died within the hour, apparently from massive brain damage.
Senna's close friend reflected on the situation at hand on the eve of the race. I was sitting in my car, watching the pictures on the portable TV screen. I could see how bad it was. I knew how critical the situation looked. For the first time, I found myself shaking after an accident. In our job, you have to be prepared to see situations like this, but because the driver was Austrian and a personal friend, it was worse. You shouldn't differentiate between drivers like that, but this does affect you in a different way. I felt sick. I got out of the car and went to the motorhome where I was still shaking. You ask yourself whether you want to drive or not. The question is about racing. It is not related to this afternoon, and it will not make any difference to Roland. But yesterday, when I saw Rubens Barrichello's accident, it made me realize how close we are to life and death. So you ask these questions. Then you say, yes, I'm gonna race on Sunday. So you go out and try to concentrate on the job. It was difficult, it was very hard. Senna wanted to honor Ratzenberger and after some debate decided he would race. He put an Austrian flag in his pocket so when he claimed the victory, he could display it in honor and respect of Ratzenberger's memory. On the morning of the race following Ratzenberger's death, over 200 million people tuned in to watch the race on live TV.
しかしこれセナは嫌ですね。後ろにシューマッハ肉薄ですね。ミラーに完全に映る位置にミハイル・シューマッハ。そしてストレートからそして高速タンブレロを抜けていきます。ここでのスピードは完全にアイルトン・セナ、ウィリアムズのセナがなんとウォールにクラッシュ。またのクラッシュ。破片が飛び散っている。アイルトン・セナに何が起こったのか。大波乱のサンマリノ、アイルトン・セナにもイモラが牙を剥きました。アイルトン・セナのマシンが大破。どうしたんでしょう今年のイモラ。今年のサンマリノは大変なことが続きます。アイルトン・セナのマシンが飛び散っています。今のはまたこの表情。アイルトン・セナは大丈夫か。完全にコンクリートウォールにアイルトン・セナのウィリアムズの FW16 が突っ込んでいきました。ここは高速コーナーです。タンブレロです。高速コーナーです。赤旗ですね。再び赤旗か。アイルトン・セナがどうでしょう。今
ここで皆さんに非常に残念なニュースをお伝えしなくてはいけません。
なんとか最後の力を振り絞ってほしいと思っていたアイルトン・セナですが、先ほど亡くなったというニュースが入ってまいりました。どういうふうに伝えていいかわからないですよね。そうですね。河合さんが、先ほどこちらの方に帰ってきてくれました。情報が入ったと思います。しばらくその生命維持装置で、懸命にそのセナの、命を吹き返そうと病院の皆さん、ICU で、懸命の治療を続けたそうですが、現場の6時3分今からちょうど15分ぐらい前だと思いますが、残念ながらアイルトン・セナがこの世を去ってしまいました。非常に我々もこういうニュースを伝えるのは辛いんですが、今宮さん、もうセナなくして今の日本のこの F1 この人気はなかったんじゃないかという、そんな気もするんですが。
そうですね、今日が161戦目だったわけですけど、87年がですね、中島君と一緒に我々のモータースポーツ、こういうことも受け入れなければいけない。我々は集中してレースに臨まなければいけない、そういう気持ちであの事故の直後僕もずっと喋ってきたんですけれども、正直言いましてすいません、あの現場を見た瞬間私はちょっと今日は喋れる状況には今までありませんでした。ただこういう事実はですね、特にモータースポーツに働いてきているものの一人とすればですね、やはり
もう我々はもう冥福を祈るだけしかありませんが、ちょっと本当に、こちらの方で取り乱してしまいまして大変申し訳ないと思っております。日本のファンの皆さんもこのテレビをご覧になってセナに対する思いをいろいろ思い浮かべていらっしゃるかと思いますが、これは事実として我々も受け止めなくてはいけないし、そしてセナに対する思いというのはブラジルの次に、あるいはブラジルをしのうかもしれない、それほど日本のファンはアイルトン・セナに対する思いが強かった。そのセナの冥福をぜひ皆さんも、テレビの前で祈っていただきたいと思います。アイルトン・セナがこの世を去ってしまいました。
Neither of these two accidents had anything to do with drivers wrestling with their cars, trying to overdrive it and losing control purely through trying to go quickly. I think in both situations, in both circumstances, something has broken, possibly with the car, possibly some debris on the circuit, possibly a tyre. There has been some outside influence, rendering the driver no chance of controlling the vehicle.
Good evening. Ayrton Senna, 3 times world motor racing champion, has died after crashing during the San Marino Grand Prix. Senna suffered irreversible brain damage when his car veered off the track at almost 200 miles an hour. He was taken to hospital in nearby Bologna, but he died a few hours later.
Senna's death was considered a national tragedy for Brazil, declaring a 3-day mourning period. Approximately 3 million people lined the streets, making it one of the largest attended funerals in human history. Senna greatly cared about his home country and the future generation. Throughout his life, he went through great lengths to reduce what he felt was a disparity between the rich and poor, made more evident as he visited countries around the world. It was something he often spoke about with passion. For Senna, the approach forward was a multi-pronged venture designed to generate money through investment, licensing, and merchandise, which would then be funneled into programs designed to help educate the youth. He already had a popular comic called Seninha that would become a financial foundation for the company. One thing Ayrton wanted was to give a percentage of the proceeds of Seninha, his comic book and cartoon character, to the project. When he had the accident, the family decided that we would give 100% of the royalties. We worked quickly. He spoke to me in March, the accident was in May, and by July we had established the Senna Foundation. What no one but Senna's closest family knew is that he had already been giving away mass amounts of his fortune to those in need. This new foundation was his plan to ensure something would remain for the people long after he was gone. Estimates place his charitable donations at the time of his death around 10 to 50% of his income each year. When he passed, approximately $400 million in US dollars remained, most of which was funneled into the newly established foundation to help the people of Brazil. The end result is the Ayrton Senna Institute, which helps with the education of approximately 2 million children and gives further education to around 60,000 teachers each year. One thing that can't be overstated is the people's love for Senna. Even decades after his passing, enthusiasm remains high as his memory is very much alive. In the gaming world, he has yet to be forgotten. Shortly after his passing, Aero the Acrobat 2 released, with the game being dedicated to the memory of Ayrton Senna. Over the next 5 years, Senna's popularity in Japan would be further cemented by releases on the Saturn and PlayStation bearing his name, with a portion of the proceeds from each release going to his foundation. Ayrton Senna Personal Talk Message for the Future, released exclusively for the Saturn in '95. It was a collection of interviews and photos taken over the course of his life, but didn't include any gameplay. 1 year later, Ayrton Senna Kart Duel released as a PlayStation exclusive. The series would span 3 games, with the last release being Ayrton Senna Kart Duel Special in '99. The games were all well received, giving players an authentic kart sim that also paid tribute to the man himself via an in-game memorial. While a number of books and documentaries about Senna continued to release, another game honoring him wouldn't appear until 2014, when Gran Turismo 6 paid tribute to one of the most influential people in Japanese motorsports history. Content honoring his life was included via a free update. The add-on contained 3 stages covering his karting, Formula 3, and Formula 1 heritage. Perhaps the greatest honor has been in 2019, with the release of the highly revered Formula 1 Senna vs. Prost Special Edition, a release marking 28 years of mainstream affection and appreciation to the man who chased perfection while helping to mainstream Formula 1 in Japan, Honda to the world, and charity to mankind. I watched an incredible amount of footage for this documentary, read every good book I could find, while combing over literally hundreds of hours of material in an attempt to tell the story as accurately as possible. At the end, one thing became clear, and it's a statement I've heard a few times. Most drivers flash signs of brilliance from time to time, and when in the proper car, might even win races and championships. Senna was different from any other driver. He started in Formula 1 at the end of one generation, staying in long enough to bridge the gap to the next. 2 generations containing some of the best drivers to ever live, and among them all, Senna is clearly at the top. He was brilliant on every single occasion he competed, regardless of his machine. Watching over a decade of his work, it's not hard to see why most Formula 1 drivers, past or present, consider him the greatest to have ever graced the sport. Thank you so much for watching. Links to resources and further material of interest are included down below.